Hello, this is Professor MCal with a reading of Magick in Theory and Practice by the Master Therion, Aleister Crowley. This book was originally published in 1929. We're going to start with the introduction. Magick is the highest, most absolute, and most divine knowledge of natural philosophy, advanced in its works and wonderful operations, by a right understanding of the inward and occult virtue of things, so that true agents being applied to proper patience, strange and admirable effects will thereby be produced. Whence magicians are profound and diligent searchers into nature, they, because of their skill, know how to anticipate an effect, the which to the vulgar shall seem to be a miracle. That's from the Goetia of the Lemegeton of King Solomon. Wherever sympathetic magic occurs in its pure, unadulterated form, it is assumed that in nature, one event follows another necessarily and invariably without the intervention of any spiritual or personal agency. Thus, its fundamental conception is identical with that of modern science. Underlying the whole system is a faith, implicit but real and firm, in the order and uniformity of nature. The magician does not doubt that the same causes will always produce the same effects, that the performance of the proper ceremony accompanied by the appropriate spell will inevitably be attended by the desired results, unless, indeed, his incantations should chance to be thwarted and foiled by the more potent charms of another sorcerer. He supplicates no higher power, he sues the favor of no fickle and wayward being, he abases himself before no awful deity. Yet his power, great as he believes it to be, is by no means arbitrary and unlimited. He can wield it so long as he strictly conforms to the rules of his art, or to what may be called the laws of nature as conceived by him. To neglect these rules, to break these laws in the smallest particular, is to incur failure, and may even expose the unskillful practitioner himself to the utmost peril. If he claims a sovereignty over nature, it is a constitutional sovereignty rigorously limited in its scope, and exercised in exact conformity with ancient usage. Thus, the analogy between the magical and the scientific conceptions of the world is close. In both of them, the succession of events is perfectly regular and certain, being determined by immutable laws, the operation of which can be foreseen and calculated precisely. The elements of caprice, of chance, and of accident are banished from the course of nature. Both of them open up to a seemingly boundless vista of possibilities to him who knows the causes of things and can touch the secret springs that set in motion the vast and intricate mechanism of the world. Hence the strong attraction which magic and science alike have exercised on the human mind. Hence the powerful stimulus that both have given to the pursuit of knowledge. They lure the weary inquirer, the footsore seeker, on through the wilderness of disappointment in the present by their endless promises of the future. They take him up to the top of an exceeding high mountain, and shew him beyond the dark clouds and rolling mists at his feet, a vision of the celestial city, far off it may be, but radiant with unearthly splendor, bathed in the light of dreams. Dr. J. G. Fraser, The Golden Bow. So far, therefore, as the public profession of magic has been one of the roads by which men have passed to supreme power, it has contributed to emancipate mankind from the thraldom of tradition and to elevate them into larger, freer life with a broader outlook on the world. This is no small service rendered to humanity. And when we remember further in another direction, magic has paved the way for science, we are forced to admit that if the black art has done much evil, it has also been the source of much good. That if it is the child of error, it has yet been the mother of freedom and truth. Ibid. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, also the mantras and spells, the Obia and the Wanga, the work of the wand and the work of the sword. These he shall learn and teach. He must teach, but he may make severe the ordeals. The word of the law is Thelema. That is from Liber Alvel 31, the book of the law. This book is for all, for every man, woman, and child. My former work has been misunderstood and its scope limited by my use of technical terms. It has attracted only too many dilettanti, and eccentrics, weaklings seeking in magic an escape from reality. I myself was first consciously drawn to the subject in this way, and it has repelled only too many scientific and practical minds such as I most designed to influence. But magic is for all. I have written this book to help the banker, the pugilist, the biologist, the poet, the Navi, the grocer, the factory girl, the mathematician, the stenographer, the golfer, the wife, the consul, and all the rest, to fulfill themselves perfectly, each in his or her own proper function. Let me explain in a few words how it came about that I blazoned the word magic upon the banner that I have borne before me all my life. Before I touched my teens, I was already aware that I was the beast whose number is 666. I didn't understand in the least what that implied. It was a passionately ecstatic sense of identity. In my third year at Cambridge, I devoted myself consciously to the great work, understanding thereby the work of becoming a spiritual being, free from the constraints, accidents, and deceptions of material existence. I found myself at a loss for the name to designate my work, just as H.P. Blavatsky some years earlier. Theosophy, spiritualism, occultism, mysticism all involve undesirable connotations. I chose, therefore, the name Magick, as essentially the most sublime and actually the most discredited of all the available terms. I swore to rehabilitate magic, to identify it with my own career, and to compel mankind to respect, love, and trust that which they scorned, hated, and feared. I have kept my word. But the time is now to come for me to carry my banner into the thick of the press of human life. I must make magic the essential factor in the life of all. In presenting this book to the world, I must then explain and justify my position by formulating a definition of magic, and setting forth its main principles in such a way that all may understand instantly that their souls, their lives, and every relation with every other human being in every circumstance depend upon magic and the right comprehension and right application thereof. 1. Definition. Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. Illustration. It is my will to inform the world of certain facts. With my knowledge, I therefore take magical weapons, pen, ink, and paper. I write incantations, these sentences, in the magical language, i.e., that which is understood by the people I wish to instruct. I call forth spirits, such as printers, publishers, booksellers, and so forth, to constrain them to convey my message to those people. The composition and distribution of this book is thus an act of magic by which I cause changes to take place in conformity with my will. In one sense, magic may be defined as a name given to science by the vulgar. 2. Postulate. Any required change may be effected by the application of proper kind and degree of force in the proper manner, through the proper medium of the proper object. 3. Theorems. 1. Every intentional act is a magical act. By intentional, I mean willed, but even unintentional acts so seemingly are not truly so. Thus, breathing is an act of the will to live. 2. Every successful act has conformed to the postulate. 3. Every failure proves that one or more requirements of the postulate has not been fulfilled. 4. The first requisite for causing any change is through qualitative and quantitative understanding of the conditions. 5. The second requisite of causing any change is the practical ability to set in right motion the necessary forces. 6. Every man and woman is a star. That is to say, every human being is intrinsically an independent individual with his own proper character and proper motion. 7. Every man and every woman has a course depending partly on the self and partly on the environment, which is natural and necessary for each. Anyone who is forced from his own course, either through not understanding himself or through external opposition, comes into conflict with the order of the universe and suffers accordingly. 8. A man whose conscious will is at odds with his true will is wasting strength. He cannot hope to influence his environment efficiently. 9. A man who is doing his true will has the inertia of the universe to assist him. 10. Nature is a continuous phenomenon, though we may not know in all cases how things are connected. 11. Science enables us to take advantage of the continuity of nature by the empirical application of certain principles whose interplay involves different orders of idea, connected with each other in a way beyond our present comprehension. 12. Man is ignorant of the nature of his own being and powers. Even his idea of his limitations is based on experience of the past, and every step in his progress extends his empire. There is therefore no reason to assign theoretical limits to to what he may be or what he may do. 13. Every man is more or less aware that his individuality comprises several orders of existence, even when he maintains that his subtler principles are merely symptomatic of the changes in his gross vehicle. A similar order may be assumed to extend throughout nature. 14. Man is capable of being and using anything which he perceives, for everything which he perceives is in a certain sense a part of his being. He may thus subjugate the whole of the universe of which he is conscious to his individual will. 15. Every force in the universe is capable of being transformed into any other kind of force by using suitable means. There is thus an inexhaustible supply of any particular kind of force that we may need. 16. The application of any given force affects all the orders of being which exist in the object to which is it applied, whichever of those orders is directly affected. 17. A man may learn to use any force so as to serve any purpose by taking advantage of the above theorems. 18. He may attract himself to any force of the universe by making himself a fit receptacle for it and arranging conditions so that its nature compels it to flow toward him. 19. Man's sense of himself as separate from and opposed to the universe is a bar to his conducting its currents. It insulates him. 20. Man can only attract and employ the forces for which he is really fitted. 21. There is no limit to the extent of the relations of any man with the universe in essence, for as soon as man makes himself one with any idea, the means of measurement cease to exist. But his power to utilize that force is limited by his mental power and capacity, and by the circumstances of his human environment. 22. Every individual is essentially sufficient to himself, but he is unsatisfactory to himself until he has established himself in his right relation with the universe. 23. Magic is the science of understanding oneself and one's conditions. It is the art of applying that understanding in action. 24. Every man has an indefeasible right to be what he is. 25. Every man must do magic each time he acts or even thinks, since a thought is an internal act whose influence ultimately affects action, though it may not do so at the time. 26. Every man has the right of self-preservation, to fulfill himself in the utmost. 27. Every man should make magic the keystone of his life. He should learn its laws and live by them. By transitory things, but a force in nature, as impersonal, impartial, and eternal as gravitation, as patient and irresistible as the tides. His system will not be subject to panic any more than the laws of inverse squares and disturbed by elections. He will not be anxious about his affairs because they will not be his, and for that reason he will be able to direct them with the calm, clear-headed confidence of an onlooker, with intelligence unclouded by self-interest and power unimpaired by passion. 28. Man has a right to fulfill his own will without being afraid that it may interfere with that of others, for he is in his proper place. It is the fault of others if they interfere with him. I hope that the above principles will demonstrate to all that their welfare, their very existence, is bound up in magic. I trust that they will understand not only the reasonableness, but the necessity of the fundamental truth which I was the means of giving to mankind. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I trust that they will assert themselves as individually absolute, and that they will grasp the fact that it is their right to assert themselves, and to accomplish the task for which their nature fits them. Yeah, morally, that this is their duty, and that not only to themselves but to others, a duty founded upon universal necessity, and not to be shirked on account of any casual circumstance of the moment which may seem to put such conduct in the light of inconvenience or even cruelty. I hope that the principles outlined above will help them to understand this book and prevent them from being deterred from its study by the more or less technical language in which it is written. The essence of magic is simple enough in all conscience. It is not otherwise with the art of government. The aim is simply prosperity, but the theory is tangled, and the best practices beset with briars. And in the same way magic is merely to be and to do, I should add to suffer, for magic is the verb, and it is part of the training to use the passive voice. This is, however, a matter of initiation rather than of magic in its ordinary sense. It is not my fault if being is baffling and doing desperate. Yet, once the above principles are firmly fixed in the mind, it is easy enough to sum up the situation very shortly. One must find out for oneself and make sure beyond doubt who one is, what one is, why one is. This done, one may put the will which is implicit in the why into words, or rather into one word. Being thus conscious of proper course to pursue, the next thing is to understand the conditions necessary to following it out. After that, one must eliminate from oneself every element alien or hostile to success, and develop those parts of oneself which are especially needed to control the aforesaid conditions. Let us make an analogy. A nation must become aware of its own character before it can be said to exist. From that knowledge, it must divine its destiny. It must then consider the political conditions of the world, how other countries may help or hinder it. It must then destroy itself, if any, destroy it in itself any elements discordant with its destiny. Lastly, it must develop in itself those qualities which will enable it to combat successfully the external conditions which threaten to oppose its purpose. We have had a recent example in the case of the young German Empire, which, knowing itself at its will, disciplined and trained itself so that it conquered the neighbors which it had oppressed it for so many centuries. But after 1866 and 1870, 1914, it mistook itself for superhuman. It willed a thing impossible. It failed to eliminate its own internal jealousies. It failed to understand the conditions of victory. Magick, it was pulled down and broken into pieces by provincialism and democracy, so that neither individual excellence nor civic virtue has yet availed to raise it again to that majestic unity which made so bold a bid for the mastery of the race of man. The sincere student will discover behind the symbolic technicalities of his book a practical method of making himself a magician. The processes described will enable him to discriminate between what he actually is and what he has fondly imagined himself to be. He must behold his soul in all its awful nakedness. He must not fear to look on that appalling actuality. He must discard the gaudy garments which his shame has screened him. He must accept the fact that nothing can make him anything but what he is. He may lie to himself, drug himself, hide himself, but he is always there. Magic will teach him that his mind is playing him traitor. It is as if a man were told that Taylor's fashion plates were the canon of human beauty, so that he tried to make himself formless and featureless like them, and shuddered with horror at the idea of Holbein making a portrait of him. Magic will show him the beauty and majesty of the self, which he has tried to suppress and disguise. Having discovered his identity, he will soon perceive his purpose. Another process will show him how to make that purpose pure and powerful. He may then learn how to estimate his environment, learn how to make allies, how to make himself prevail against all powers whose error has caused them to wander across his path. In the course of this training, he will learn to explore the hidden mysteries of nature and to develop new senses and faculties in himself, whereby he may communicate with and control beings and forces pertaining to orders of existence which have been hitherto inaccessible to profane research, and available only to that unscientific and imperial magic which I came to destroy in order that I might fulfill. I send this book into the world that every man and woman may take hold of life in the proper manner. It does not matter if one's present house of flesh be the hut of a shepherd. By virtue of my magic, he shall be such a shepherd as David was. If it be in the studio of a sculptor, he shall so chisel from himself the marble that masks his idea, that he shall be no less a master than Rodin. Witness mine hand to Megatherium, the beast 666, Magus 92 AA, who was the word of the Aeon Thelema, whose name is called Va 8 to 3 AA in the city of the pyramids, Uma 74 AA, Ol Sanuf Veo Resaji 65, and in the mountain of Ebiginus, but Frater Perdurabo of the outer order of the AA, and in the world of men upon earth, Aleister Crowley of Trinity College, Cambridge. Thank you for listening to that introduction to Magic and Theory and Practice. Next will be Chapter 0. Please tune in.